Well, good morning, Mr. Keith Crescent. Thanks for joining me on the STEM Excellence podcast. I look
Good
forward
morning.
to learning a lot today. So, if you don't mind me asking, first of all, if someone asks who is Mr. Keith Crescent, how would you reply?
Oh, it'll probably be a short reply.
Okay.
I, I've worked for about almost 30 years and three kids, and live in the San Diego area. And overall, I'm a pretty happy, content guy. And it all depends on who's asking, but life is good, and happy to chat with you on your podcast and help anyone who I possibly can.
Thank you so much. And this podcast is mostly for middle school and high school students and their parents, and people who are in the stage of life trying to figure out what to do with their lives. That's part of the element of what I discuss on the podcast. It's the STEM Excellence podcast because we love talking about science, technology, engineering, and math. And one of the things that led me to find Mr. Keith Crescent is actually because I wrote a math curriculum that I was going to call Counting to Calculus. But I thought, why don't I Google and make sure nobody else has the same name? And then you came up, and your book came up, as well as a few other books. But of all the books I found, yours ended up being the best one I could use for my students. And so that's part of how we met. So if you don't mind, could you share with us, how did this happen, and why did you choose to do this?
Well, that's funny. So I was in my 20s. I had been married just a few years, and I was finishing my master's degree at the University of Colorado in electrical engineering. And I decided to go right from my engineering graduate degree to an MBA. And I was about to attend Cornell University and to get my MBA, and they had a math camp. And I was curious why they had a math camp to kick things off. And it was optional. And I looked into it, and the basic answer was that the math education for most was not up to par for MBA students, even Cornell students. These are some of the best students in the world. And I found that the math education was lacking. And so I thought, well, I know math pretty well, and a lot of people ask me for help. So instead of just answering individual questions, why don't I write a book? So between the two graduate degrees, I spent about 8 weeks, which isn't very long.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book in my little apartment on Microsoft Word with some clip art. And I didn't think much of it. It was to help them. And my parents had some friends that were homeschooling that would ask me questions too. And I thought, well, I can use it for the math camp, and I can use it to help my parents' friends who are homeschooling. And I wrote the book, this was 1997, I think it was. And since then, I sold a lot of copies and received a lot of great feedback.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. And while we're still on the topic of the book, this other book came years later. What inspired the second one, the Math Problems and Solutions Guide?
Yeah. So the original math book, my thinking was, I'm just going to explain everything, and I'll use examples, but I don't want to add problem sets, because if you look at most math books, like more than half of it are just problem sets and solutions. And I thought, I want to spend every valuable page explaining mathematics. I don't want to waste paper with just problem sets. And I thought, well, people can come up with their own problem sets. But lots of people wrote to me. By the way, they asked for, like, could you do one in chemistry? Could you do one in physics? And I never did. Maybe I should do that someday. But the most common request was, could you do problem sets that align with each section of your explanation book? And so I thought, wow, that's a lot of work. I'm pretty busy. And so I contacted a PhD student at the University of California, San Diego. And he and I met for coffee for 2 years in a row. Every Saturday we met for coffee for 2 years in a row. And he came up with a lot of the problem solutions, and I reviewed them and kind of guided them. And that's David. And I think David currently is still a professor at Stanford. David and I wrote the book, and most of the credit goes to him on the problems and solutions, but I'd say we co-wrote it. And then I wrote the other one, myself, years prior.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that. I know I hadn't, maybe I shared a little bit of this in my email to you, but in 2011, so I graduated in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin, grew up in Nigeria, studied chemistry pre-med. I wanted to help kids as a pediatrician. That was the original plan. But I found that there's a better way to do it in education. That's kind of part of the story. But what happened was I taught for 2 years, and during my years teaching high school students, I decided to put off my PhD, which was my alternative to getting a medical degree. So while I was teaching high school students, I realized that the students in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry were learning how to graph 3 times in a row. And sometimes they couldn't graph in pre-calc yet. They hadn't mastered the skill. And so I thought, why don't I just take all the books for all the grade levels and condense them into one curriculum? And so I wrote my little book here called Tools for Mastering Mathematics back in 2014. But it basically has a list of every topic that kids learn from kindergarten to 12th grade, long list. And so the idea was, what if we could just ask people, hey, what are you struggling with in math? And they actually answer, I'm struggling with factoring polynomials, not I'm struggling with Algebra 1. Like, can you be specific? And so I did this 10 years ago. And my dream was always, can I write this into a book? So I've written the topics, I've written the reasons for why you should be good at math. But I said, what if I wrote it as a book with examples? And that was the idea of Counting to Calculus. So I have a lot of the videos, everything there. I just didn't have a book. And so when I saw your book, you literally saved me years of work.
I'm glad that worked out. I think we had a very similar idea. A lot of books kind of review what's in the previous, learnings in the first half of the book, and touch on things the second half of the book, have lots of problems and solutions. And that's why books are 500 pages, you don't cover as much. So I had the same idea to try and condense everything from kindergarten to high school all in one book. So I'm glad it aligns with your vision also.
Yes, no, thank you. And please know that if you ever do want to touch on physics or sorry, I dropped my book. I have a book here on physics by Maxwell, about Maxwell, James Clerk Maxwell. If you ever want to do the physics or chemistry or have inspiration, I'm willing to try and do some work on that. Because
we should do that sometime. Yeah, let me tell you, Amos, about, this is all unscripted, of course, about 5 or 6 years ago, I presented at the World AI Conference in China.
Yeah.
And, they contacted me afterwards, and I did it on artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And some of the sponsors in China contacted me afterwards and said, "Can we use your presentation in our book?" And so the most recent thing is my presentation and outline is in a book teaching hundreds of thousands of Chinese students how to learn artificial intelligence. So
wow.
I do think maybe there's an opportunity we can collaborate in the future on multiple areas.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I wanted to bring up, and some of these questions now I might go off script if you don't mind. This is just something to think about. But so I've written a book. I guess there's an outline, there's a table of contents. I've written other books on this issue, but one book I'm writing now, so I've written the outline. It's called STEM Excellence. So it matches with the podcast. And what I'm trying to talk about in the book is, how do we raise the next generation of scientists, mathematicians, and engineers in the AI age? And one of the claims I want to make, and I would love to hear your feedback, is I think that teaching calculus independent of physics is not a good idea in general, because the students don't see how the calculus applies to something, right? We can have other examples, but when Isaac Newton did his work, he was tied a lot with astronomy and physics. And so I feel like it would make sense to show the connection. What is your thought on sort of an integrated STEM, math and science? Because imagine we took your book and we basically integrated physics and chemistry, and made a book that shows how it all connects. That's part of what I'm getting at. What do you think, sir?
Well, I'll tell you what my view is. I educated, all 3 of my kids. They all did very well. All got 5s on their math advanced placement tests, and have done very well in college. But I taught them all math. And my goal was to get it so at least they understood the basics of calculus before they entered high school.
Wow.
And it was important to me because I thought you need to have this foundation, because the foundation leads to, areas of physics and areas of chemistry and areas of engineering and so forth. And so I think it's good to have a super firm foundation. And then once you get into the more detailed, complex areas of calculus and so forth, then I think combining that with a field where it's practical is a really good idea. So it's kind of like build this firm foundation of mathematics, be very conversant, don't be intimidated by math. And then I think the much more advanced math, when people get into specific fields, and then I think combining it makes lots of sense. Because otherwise studying math just for math's sake may be interesting. But I think it's a lot more interesting, a lot more productive to combine it with practical application. You just need that firm foundation built. And
and I love your imagery here with that. I know you and I messaged briefly about this, but in Nigeria, we actually are required to learn calculus before we graduate. It's actually and that's the crazy thing is that's the bare minimum is that everybody graduates with calculus. And in Singapore, I ordered some Singapore books just because I wanted to look at what Singapore does. And they actually do calculus in 10th grade in their additional maths class. And so what I think is interesting is that in America, the expectation bar is too low, and therefore people are not even performing at that low bar. What if we just said, hey guys, the counting to calculus framework is what you should aspire for your kids, because it will help your child have the best opportunities. There's no limit, no pun intended. There's no limits to what you can do, if you have calculus covered. And so that's the mindset I'm providing to my families. Now, one thing I tell them is they ask me sometimes, well, what if my kid doesn't want to go into math or science? And I tell them what I think is valid, which is that math is beautiful, even if you don't want to go into STEM. So anyways, that was a quick tangent on why I think we need to change the framework for math ed in America, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think too many adults make it intimidating for kids. And I wanted to write the book so that literally a grade school student could understand all the way through basic calculus. Wow. That was my goal, because once you understand the foundation, like that pyramid you build up, if you understand the foundation, you can move to the next level. And you can move to the next level all the way to the top of the pyramid, which is calculus, which I think should be the top of the pyramid for every student. And it shouldn't be intimidating. I think that's one of the problems today is, algebra, you can stop now. And mathematics is everywhere. And you get a very different perspective of the world if you well understand mathematics, whether it's, protein folding, or whether it's in, astronomy, or whether it's in economics, or whether it's in material science or whatever. These all require calculus. And even everyday living, you take a sparkler and you spin it around and it looks like the sparkler is a complete circle, right? Why is that? Because your eye is an integrator. Where do you learn? It's an integrator. You learn from calculus that it's adding up, right? The history. So you just learn to appreciate life more if you have a stronger mathematical background. And all three of my kids, I got them at least an intro to calculus by the time they were finishing 8th grade. And it's not that they were necessarily naturally gifted. I really believe that just about any student could accomplish the same.
Wow. So quick commercial break question. Who's your favorite mathematician, if you had to choose one?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. But, Newton being able to, derive calculus or come up with calculus by the age of, 20, 23, 24 years old. To me, and then how he applied that to mechanics and laws of thermodynamics is super impressive. So it's very, very practical. You have much more advanced mathematics, but to build that foundation of calculus, I think is probably stands out to me as one of the most impressive achievements anywhere.
Okay, well, I'll just introduce you to mine, and then we'll look at my next question. This is Leonard Euler. Part of this is why I teach math history as part of my teaching, is that it gives me an opportunity to inspire people to care a little more than they would. And when I read about, Newton, I would argue is the smartest. There's no, especially when you calculate for the fact that he didn't have the internet and he didn't have calculus. So he started. And he did what he did. So I joke that could we imagine if Newton had the internet? That's what I joke about. What would that be? Some people argue that he might not have become Newton because he would have been distracted. But I think that Euler and Euler's identity, which you guys in electrical engineering, some of these things come around. I just think Euler's story is inspirational. He gets blind and still publishes 50 papers a year. I think that his work is phenomenal. So anyways, these are some of the additions that I like to complement with books like yours as a resource, so that kids are seen. Imagine if they see the scenario that led to the discovery of the equation. Like, look at the problem they were trying to solve, and look how they solved the problem. I think that in the AI age, I feel like because information is everywhere, we need to find other ways to get the kids to care so that they can then access that information. What do you think about the whole inspirational and trying to inspire kids to care?
Yeah. I think, if you treat kids as just kind of little machines, and this is how you calculate it, and this is the answer, it's okay, but it's not very interesting or inspiring. If you start to create context around it, and stories around it, and reasons behind it, and practicality around it, it becomes much, much more powerful. It's kind of like memorizing dates versus understanding history, or memorizing the names of plants versus explaining how plants grow and how you feed them and what environment and what soil and what water and what sun and everything else. You need that context versus just saying, that's a whatever, that's a given plant. So I think almost in any area, providing the context and how it influences lives and influences the world is extremely, extremely important. To get people engaged and to help your memory. We have 5 senses, right? And so you don't just want one sense, you want inputs from lots of different directions, and those are the things that are most memorable.
So then let's go back to a question then. In America, we have a myth, this idea that you don't need to know what you need to do till you get to college. Now, I personally struggle. I'm concerned about that, because if I know I want to be an electrical engineer and I'm 10 years old, that's going to be different from if I want to be a doctor in terms of some of the opportunities I would seek out. And I don't know if we're just afraid, maybe you can share as a parent your thoughts on this, but I don't know if people are just afraid to make a commitment early. But in Nigeria, you have to commit at 14. Whether you like it or not, you have to commit. So I guess my question then is, what is you became an electrical engineer, but when did you know you wanted to do that? And what is the advice to parents on this issue of careers and thinking about careers?
So I think it's I'd be a little hesitant to like lock in and load at 14 or something. But I think the idea is that, each child is born different with different interests. And I think it's where things grow. I think you need more sunlight and water. So basically, you need to just encourage kind of what's innate in a person early on, and see where that goes and grows, and allow the flexibility and capability to move. So let me give you an example. My oldest daughter, and a little personal, but my oldest daughter, she was always very good at math, very, very smart, but good at all subjects, not just math. And and over time, she didn't know what she wanted. And she was like, oh, maybe I'll be an architect, or maybe I'll go into finance, or whatever the case may be. And I kind of required her to take a computer science class in her senior year in high school. And she was like, Dad, I don't really like computers. I want, I like plants, and I like all these other things, but I don't like computers. But she had a strong foundation, educationally. I said, Jenna, just try a computer science class and see if you like it. Well, fast forward, she got her degree in computer science and machine learning, and she's an engineer at Apple. But she had no idea what even machine learning was or computer science until she was a senior in high school. But she had that foundation. So I think kind of encouraging what the student really enjoys and likes. It doesn't have to be identical. Hey, I want to be a professional baseball player, so all I do is take them to baseball and whatever. But is it sports? Is it the athletics? So what do you like about it? And then if you build a foundation that provides opportunities for the future. So, I have 3 kids that have very different careers, very, very different, all grew up in the same household, but they all have to have a foundation. And I encourage them to follow what they really liked. One on medicine, one regenerative medicine and health, one on like digital effects in Hollywood, one in engineering. And I think that's one of the keys, is just kind of where something is naturally growing, just provide the right, fertilizer and water and sunlight, and watch it continues to grow. And maybe it'll pop up somewhere else, and maybe it'll continue to grow where it is, but don't try and force fit something. Force the kid to do one thing that the child really doesn't want to do. I think that's a uphill fight, and people are different. And if you just encourage the way that God made each child, then I think things seem to work out pretty well.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah, and that's part of my view when I was thinking of pediatrics was, these children are created for a purpose. They have their lives matter and they have different gifts. How can we nourish those gifts? And I feel like some people wait till they're 20 in college and then they still don't know. So
Yeah.
clearly those gifts start shining earlier.
Early.
And there's no reason to disregard those moments. There's actually a mathematician by the name of Fermat, Pierre de Fermat, and Pierre de Fermat, Fermat's last theorem. I talk about that as part of my discussion on, just the beauty of some mathematical concepts, which one of my goals in life is to understand the proof of Fermat's last theorem. And Andrew Wiles from Oxford now, he's at Oxford University, he solved it. And it's interesting because Andrew Wiles was only 10 years old. For those who don't know what, he was 10 years old when he discovered the problem. That's what I mean. He solved it like 30, 40 years later. But the reason why I bring up Fermat's last theorem is it's a theorem that is easy enough to understand, and so those who are watching who might not know, Pythagoras' theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Fermat's last theorem is saying that you can never have it happen for anything greater than squares. So there's no a cubed plus b cubed is equal to c cubed, and so on. So the claim is it's like a big claim. And so therefore, the proof is something I really want to understand. And so anyways, I've written to Dr. Andrew Wiles. I've not had a chance to meet him yet. I'm going to keep writing and hopefully someday we'll meet and talk about the proof. For now, I'm just going to read some of his notes in my free time after I retire. But what I'm trying to get at is I think kids should know that what they dream about at 10, 11, 12, 13, let's pour some water, as he said. Let's see where that goes. But for you, though, when did you know you wanted to be an electrical engineer?
Oh, when I grew up, no one in my family was an engineer. No, I didn't even know what an engineer was. My dad drove a truck and delivered rags, in Wisconsin. So we have a Wisconsin connection. Yeah. And, my parents never went to college. My grandparents never went to high school. And it was very blue collar, where I grew up. People worked in factories and so forth. And so I didn't even know any engineers. And then when I was a freshman in high school, we actually took our first family vacation to Disney World in Florida. And we went to Epcot, and they had a ride called The World of Motion by General Motors. And it talked about past and future transportation. And I was like, this is so cool. Who is doing this? Like, who is coming up with these things? Drag coefficients for cars and all these sorts of things. And I asked at the ride, like, what type of, because they had representatives there, what type of people come up with this? And they say, this is all done by GM engineers. Wow. And I was like, oh, what's an engineer? And then I was like 13 years old. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be an engineer. And then that was when I was 13. And then I really didn't know if I wanted to be a mechanical or electrical engineer. And I thought, well, I kind of see how mechanics work. I can understand levers and pulleys and, whatever, but I have no idea how electricity works. Like, how does a radio work? Or how do I plug something in and it turns on? Like, that's just a mystery to me. It seems like magic. I don't understand how a TV can even work. And so they said, oh, electrical engineers, you'll learn all about that. So it's okay. I want to go into electrical engineering because I wanted to learn how the world works on things that I couldn't see. Electrons and electricity, things you can't see. How does that physically work? And that's why I went into electrical engineering.
Wow, that's fascinating. I don't know if you know this about Maxwell, because I study a lot of apologetics around science and faith and so on. But Maxwell, I don't know if you know this about him, but he actually was, he discovered light was electromagnetic radiation. And then he gave the work for Heinrich Hertz to do his work. And then, of course, Albert Einstein, and the rest is history. But Maxwell was bold, I would say, in some of his predictions, because some of the things he did, we couldn't see, we couldn't understand some of those things, but he went there. He went to areas where, people, anyways, it's fascinating. And he started the Cavendish Laboratory. They call him the father of electrical engineering. And I'm actually going to Cambridge next month. And so I'm going to be visiting the Cavendish Laboratory. And one of the things that's really fascinating about Maxwell's work, he died at 48, but he did a lot of work at a young age. At 15, he's publishing math papers. I mean, this guy is so phenomenal. And so when I look at his life and his story, it gets me excited about electrical engineering. I think electrical engineers are the coolest, even though my dad is an electrical engineer, but I think you guys are cool. And so even if you wanted to zoom in for a second, I guess if I'm trying to raise an electrical engineer, I have 7 kids. I'm not forcing any of them to do this. But if they wanted to do that, what would be your advice to this youngsters thinking about electrical engineering?
Well, I think there's there's a lot to say, but I mean, there's so many tools now. And so they have so many like little kits. When I was a kid, I had when I was in high school, I got I bought my first computer, and I got into computers and semiconductors, because I bought my first computer in 8th grade, and I bought some little electronics kits, when I was in high school, and
Yep.
learned to experiment, learn how electricity works, and I got some very basic books. And there's so many materials now that you can experiment with and learn from, and YouTube videos and whatever, that to encourage early learning and early discovery. And there's so many resources. You can kind of teach yourself a great amount now before waiting to officially learn it in a classroom. So I think just providing tools and hands-on and encouraging kids is great. And again, it kind of where does it lead? And you just, again, kind of water where things grow. And I think it's also important to realize that a lot of the great scientists, Newton, Einstein, Galileo, Heisenberg, etc., their major contributions were in their early 20s.
Wow.
I mean, you think all of those guys, their major contributions when they were 22, 23 years old. And it's amazing what you can do and learn even as a very young person. I mean, a lot of famous scientists, you aren't getting results when you're 40s and 50s. You're getting results in your late teens and early 20s. And so not to be intimidated and to be confident and follow the direction that really interests you, I think is the way to go. And so I think just start learning, start being curious, start hands-on, pursue what interests you. There's a whole world out there. One of the reasons I like electrical engineering is because it's a hidden world, but it has real effects.
Yep.
I can listen to the radio, I can watch TV, I can plug things in, I can run a motor, I can use the internet, I have a cell phone. It's all electrical engineering, all a hidden world. So there are things that our senses can immediately sense, but there's a hidden world out there. I wanted to learn about the hidden world. Yep. And different people have different motivations, but that's what I would do. It's like, hey, if you're curious about something, why is our water clean? How does water get to my house? How does it go from above or below ground to my faucet? Like if you're interested in things, there's a lot of resources just to go out to pursue. And curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge, I think in general, is a key to a lot of future success.
Wow. And I will mention, just so people don't think I only care about engineering, I love engineering, but I personally studied chemistry and then physics, medical physics. So I care about STEM in general. And I understand there's a place for other subjects like English. We need English to write word problems for math. So I get that there's a point for different subjects. But what I know today is that STEM is important in America, and it needs more people. We need more people to care about STEM at a young age and to aspire to excellence in STEM. So that's part of my mission in this decade of my life. I'm in my mid-30s now, and I'm looking at how can I, as a medical physicist, which is powered by electrical engineers, because you help us with the CT scanners, which was invented by an electrical engineer. And so when I look at CT scanners, which a lot of the work is also from Wisconsin, Madison, I'm trying to understand X-rays and computers and how all of that can produce an image in less than a second in some cases. I mean, this is stuff that 200 years ago, I don't know if anybody could have thought you can generate an image of a human being in less than a second. But you guys, electrical engineers and engineers in general, you guys are helping us live longer in a sense. You're helping us live healthier. And so I think one idea I also have, as you were sharing, when you said there's a lot to share, is maybe there's a little mini course on engineering that, if it exists, let me know. Otherwise, we might have to make a little mini course of, are you thinking of being an engineer? Consider watching this.
Yeah. There's, I think, almost every student, if you realize that engineers figure out how to get things to work, how to design, whether it's getting things to work inside your body, for healing, or obviously we talked about electrical engineering, or building things mechanically, or chemical engineering, or petroleum engineering, or aerospace engineering. How do you harness the natural properties around you in the world to do something to benefit mankind, right? I mean, that foundation is something that I think every student would benefit from. Not that they need to be an engineer, but at least understand kind of the process and who does what, and then figure out, each individual how they best want to contribute to the world. I think that's highly valuable.
Wow. And I actually have a couple of books I've talked about on this channel that have to do with engineering. One is called Becoming an Engineer by Jake Ryland, is the guy who's an engineer who loves to write on that. And then there's one called Engineering for Teens. So I think part of my homework is maybe I'll make a module over the next year where it just has little clips, electrical engineering, all the branches. But my last major question in the career front, if you don't mind then, is, so what did you do with your degree then afterwards?
So I got my bachelor's in electrical engineering. I worked at Texas Instruments for a little under 5 years doing engineering and doing infrared radar systems, basically. So, you can thermal imaging, if you will, which was super interesting. And then I found that in the business world, a lot of times the engineers are guided by non-engineers. And the engineers get frustrated because the non-engineers ask them to do things that don't make sense. And so they have other reasons for doing it. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to get my MBA, and I want to be able to manage engineers so they can work on things that are most productive and useful.
Yeah.
So it was, and so I went from like designing boards and writing software to more like product definition. And, in the world of, I chose the industry of semiconductors.
Okay.
I thought semiconductors, there's a window here in the world where they're going to change the world probably more than any other physical device that ever existed. And so I've worked in semiconductors now for, 20 plus years. Using my electrical engineering, because they're small circuits, but I'm not physically designing them anymore. I'm more guiding, how to build them and how to be successful doing a chip design, and that's what I've been doing for many years.
Wow, and so that means you're familiar with Nvidia then, and
sure.
Okay, that's a company that is very popular, and I know people. Is that some of what they do, and the electrical engineering, right?
Oh yeah, they have a lot of electrical engineers. Mainly, it's all electrical engineering and computer scientists. They have some mechanical engineers that'll do packaging and this sort of thing, but mostly all computer science and electrical engineering. Computer science used to be kind of like a subset of electrical engineering. Now it's obviously a big enough field where it's computer engineering is separate. Even though there's a lot of overlap. So yeah, semiconductors is all CS and EE folks. And that's what I worked at Intel for 8+ years. They've shipped the most chips into PCs. Then I worked at Qualcomm for 13+ years. They ship the most chips into phones. And then now I'm doing a startup where we're building an AI chip that in certain areas will beat Nvidia. Even though we're a small company. So yeah, I'm very familiar with them and AI in general.
Okay. Wow. And that's really cool. I don't know if you've read much about a guy named John Lennox. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but John Lennox wrote a book called 2084. And so he talks about AI in his book. I think it's pretty cool what AI can do, but I think that we're also at a point where sometimes people have these philosophical questions about where is AI headed. But before I land my plane with a few last questions here, do you have any thoughts for those people? Have you ever heard people bring up the AI, sort of the philosophical dimension or ethics of AI?
Oh, absolutely. And that probably requires a whole additional podcast. But I
Sounds
would say,
good.
what's especially relevant here is, computer scientists would write code, just write lines of code, right?
Yep.
And AI is not a human writing lines of code. AI is, you start with a very general mathematical model, and you train it based on data. You send data in, you figure out what the output is, and if the output's wrong, you create a feedback loop basically, and you back propagate. So you're basically training a mathematical model with AI, right? That's all AI is. It's a big mathematical model. And now you can put your question in and get an answer out. And it's trillions of operations per second in mathematics. It's all mathematics and statistics, right? That's coming up with AI. So intelligence is basically a giant math equation that's happening right now. That's tuned and tweaked, over months and months and months. So that'd be a whole other topic, I think. But the link between AI and mathematics is direct. It's humans, you have chemicals and chemistry and all these other sensing inputs and so forth. AI is a math equation. And at a startup I am at, we develop an AI accelerator. Think of it like a big calculator. That's all basically it is. It's just a big calculator of mathematics.
Wow. I would love to see your PowerPoint, if you don't mind, the one you gave to China. I would love to just see that, if that exists for the public. But I would love to learn more about, AI and that whole space. So then when I think about, the future with my family, even, for example, I have this thing I'm processing. Like, if somebody was older and decided they wanted to become an engineer, more specifically a computer and electrical engineer, would you say that the field is ripe enough that even if people are starting later in the game, they should still consider a field like that? I mean, this is not stopping anytime soon as far as AI. Or what are your thoughts for even adults that are thinking of pivoting into computer and electrical engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was an exciting field many, many years ago.
Yep.
And it still is, if anything, more so.
Okay.
And so, I think today you look at the job market, and many of the highest paid jobs are the most demand jobs. And for me, many of the most interesting jobs are in the areas of electrical engineering and computer science.
Yep.
And so, once if you think electrical engineering, okay, there's different areas you could go into. Is it power distribution, or is it motors, or is it circuits, or is it, antennas or RF, or there's lots of different subsets of it. But broadly, those are two areas that have fundamentally changed the world, and I think it's just accelerating. It's not slowing down; it's accelerating, and I think it's personally, I think it's a very exciting place to be. So anyone that has an interest in that area, I think there's huge opportunities ahead.
Okay. Well, so lastly, then, what do you do for fun? I mean, other than engineering and so on, what does an engineer like you do for fun?
Oh, well, it's changed over years. I used to, just spend more time, I think, playing sports and so forth. And now I think I read a lot of books.
Okay.
And travel and basically have different experiences, whether physical or mental experiences.
Yeah.
I lead a startup now, so that's also a new experience, which is a lot of fun. Spend a lot of time with my kids, even though they're ages 20 to 25, and they're all out of the house. But we spend a lot of time visiting them, and family is extremely important. So just basic things that I think are important in life. Staying healthy, staying active, continuously learning, physical activities, family, spiritual pursuits. Those are all, I think, the best things humans can do.
Yeah. Wow. No, thank you. I don't know if you had any questions, thoughts, comments, objections for me before we land the plane. I call landing the plane ending my conversations.
Yeah. No, Amos, I just wanted to say, this is actually the first time we've talked, and I don't know who all sees your podcast, but I think what you're doing is great. You can definitely see your enthusiasm and knowledge base, and I think it's wonderful. You're helping kids and shaping the future generation. I think is one of the most important things in the world any of us can do, and so I commend you for that, and just for you reaching out and helping students and parents. Use the best of their God-given capabilities, I think is the best we can do on this, for anyone. And so I just want to encourage you and thank you for the time you're putting into this. And I would encourage your viewers and those listening to the podcast to kind of pursue their passion. And you're certainly one of those great resources that folks can turn to.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And I've talked to you briefly about some of the schools that are asking about understanding math, and I think that they're just seeing that this is a resource that can really help them to kind of put all things together and get their students what they need. So yeah, I'm gonna keep encouraging schools and parents and families to really have a mindset of math mastery from counting to calculus, and don't follow kind of what the system says. Don't think, well, America says I need only algebra 2 to graduate. Well, don't just do what America says. Do what could be best for your child, which is helping them master those skills. I know we didn't get into some of the more nitty-gritty part of the book, but maybe that'll be another podcast for those who want to go into the nitty-gritty of these topics, because some people, I think, when they see some of these topics, when they hear algebra, they just say, no, thanks, that's not for me. And so I love, maybe it's an episode geared towards educators, if you know what I mean. I need to just do one that is geared towards math educators, because I think they should explore this. Every classroom should have this in the back of the room as a tool, so that if Johnny is ahead of the class, he doesn't have to stop. He can keep learning. And I just, and I know, sorry, I opened a can of worms with some of that, but I think my heart breaks when we tell kids that, oh, we're only in chapter 7 now, sit down and wait till next month when we get to chapter 8, even though the kid is ready to go on. And I just don't think that's right, especially in an AI age where the resources abound. I really think this could disrupt math education, but I'm here to help. I'm here to help with the disruption, because it's possible, right? And you have a second? Sorry, I just thought of one thing. I just thought about an AI math world where the kids show up on Monday and they take an assessment that channels them into the specific math topic they're capable of tackling that day based on the data that is provided. I mean, how cool and effective could that be? I don't know if you don't mind just sharing. What is your thought on that kind of model?
Well, each of us can move at a different pace. So I think one of the things with a formal education is, some kids are moving at a different pace than others. And by definition, you're typically moving at the slowest pace, or the pace of the slowest student. Yep. Maybe not the slowest, but on kind of the slower students, right? Because you don't want anyone to be left behind. So that makes sense. But you're really harming the kids that want to move faster and the kids that are super talented. And next thing you know, you're saying that they need some drug or something to slow down their excitement. Yeah. And I think each kid moves at their own pace. Yep. And you want to meet that pace with learning. I mean, each of my kids learn math at a very different pace. Yep. And it's just a matter of adapting to the student. Yep. And so, I would encourage, someone that's, nothing in that book, by the way, that goes to calculus is out of reach for a grade school student. Wow. Nothing. Any grade school student could finish that book and have an understanding up to calculus. And it just comes down to the individual's motivation. So, encouraging parents and educators to help not just the students who don't like math or uncomfortable and slow. Obviously, they need help. But the kids that excel, the kids that love it, the kids are probably going to pursue that as their passion in their career or for the rest of their lives. You have to feed that, feed it and support it. And there's plenty of resources out there to do so. Yep. And if in a perfect world, everyone would move kind of at the pace that's inherent, to themselves. You need a foundation. But for those that want to pursue a more technical, mathematical path, encourage that, feed it, give it resources, and hopefully we'll get some more Newtons and Einsteins and Maxwells in our midst.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up the show at this point, and then if you have questions on what Mr. Keith Crescent has shared, or you can email amos@mathguy@gmail.com. I look forward to just creating more modules of opportunity for students to flourish in engineering, especially, which is scary for a lot of people. So thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Amos.
And thank you again
today. All right.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.